What happens when a father, a man who has spent his entire life wrestling with the ghosts of family, love, and loss, finally finds a glimmer of light in his own daughter? What happens when he pours all his hopes for redemption, all his desires for a legacy free from the poison of his past, into her? And what happens when that daughter, on the cusp of womanhood, turns away from him and runs into the arms of a man the father's own age? Not just any man, but the most famous man on earth, a global icon, a comedic genius, and a figure trailed by whispers of scandal. What does a father do when his beloved child marries a legend and, in doing so, vanishes from his life as completely as a ghost into the fog? This is a story about that father. He was a titan of the American stage, a man who dredged his own soul to create the most powerful, gut-wrenching plays ever written. He won 4 Pulitzer Prizes and a Nobel Prize, but he lost 3 children. This is the story of Eugene O'Neill, and the final shattering loss that broke his heart, silenced his pen, and defined the tragic, brilliant, and devastating arc of his life. To understand the man who would become America's master of tragedy, you have to understand the world that created him. A world of gaslights, dusty curtains, and the relentless nomadic life of the theater. Eugene O'Neill was born not in a home, but in a hotel room on Broadway in 1888, the Hotel Barrett, to be precise. From his very first breath, his life was transient, his address a temporary stop on a map dictated by a performance schedule. His father, James O'Neill, was one of the most famous actors of his day, an Irish immigrant who had achieved immense fame and fortune. James was handsome, charismatic, and haunted by a single lucrative role, the Count in The Count of Monte Cristo. He performed the swashbuckling melodrama over 6,000 times, touring it relentlessly across the country, year after year. The role made him wealthy, but it became a gilded cage, trapping his artistic potential and feeding a deep-seated fear of poverty that turned him into a notorious miser. The family's home was not a place, but a collection of resentments packed in a suitcase. They lived in hotel rooms and on rattling trains. It was in this unstable world that the second great tragedy of Eugene's life occurred, one for which he would be made to feel responsible. Following his difficult birth, his mother, the gentle convent-educated Ella Quinlan, was prescribed morphine for the pain. This was a common practice in an era when the addictive nature of opiates was poorly understood by the public and carelessly administered by doctors. Ella became a lifelong morphine addict. Within the toxic mythology of the O'Neill family, the story was simplified into a cruel and damaging narrative. Ella's addiction was Eugene's fault. He was the child whose birth had led to the needle. This birth curse created an emotional chasm between mother and son, a ghostly distance that would haunt Eugene for the rest of his days. He grew up with a mother who would periodically vanish into a fog of narcotics, leaving him and his older brother Jamie in the care of a father who was emotionally distant and obsessed with counting every penny. This was not a childhood. It was the research phase for a lifetime of writing about dysfunctional families. It was the source code for the sorrow that would fuel his genius. A childhood steeped in such profound tension and unspoken misery inevitably produces one of two things: a broken spirit or a fierce rebel. Eugene O'Neill became the latter. He embarked on a desperate, decade-long flight from the ghosts of his family, seeking to lose himself in the raw, unforgiving corners of the world. His rebellion began conventionally enough. He enrolled at Princeton University in 1906, but was expelled after less than a year for, as legend has it, throwing a rock through the window of the university president, a man who would later become the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. Freed from the constraints of academia, O'Neill's real education began. He was drawn to the sea, that vast, indifferent expanse that promised both oblivion and adventure. He signed on as a seaman, shipping out on a Norwegian bark to Buenos Aires, Argentina. This was not a romantic escapade. It was a full-scale immersion in the underbelly of society. In the ports of South America and later in Liverpool and New York, he lived a derelict existence. He drank heavily, frequented brothels, and slept on park benches and in flop houses. He lived among the sailors, the drifters, the prostitutes, and the forgotten men, the bottom-of-the-sea people, as he would later call them. He was running from the memory of his family's suffocating parlor, but he was also absorbing the authentic, unfiltered tragedies of real life. This period of wandering was punctuated by failed jobs, bouts of severe depression, and even a half-hearted suicide attempt. His father, exasperated, eventually secured him a minor job as a reporter for a local newspaper in New London, Connecticut, the closest thing the O'Neills had to a permanent home. But Eugene's body, ravaged by his hard living, finally gave out. In 1912, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. This diagnosis, which at the time was often a death sentence, became, in O'Neill's own words, the most important event of his life. He was sent to the Gaylord Farm Sanatorium to recover. It was here, in the forced stillness and quiet contemplation of the sanatorium, that his flight from himself finally ended. With the specter of death looming, he began to write. He turned his gaze inward, confronting the ghosts he had been running from his entire life. The pain, the resentment, the sorrow, it all began to pour out of him, first as poems and then as one-act plays. The sanitarium wasn't just a place of healing for his lungs, it was the crucible of his artistic birth. He had found his calling. He would no longer be a victim of his family's tragedy. He would be its chronicler. When Eugene O'Neill emerged from the sanitarium, he was a changed man, armed with a singular, ferocious ambition to transform the American theater. At the time, American drama was a commercial landscape of cheap melodramas and light-hearted comedies. O'Neill envisioned something different, a theater of psychological depth, emotional honesty, and tragic grandeur. His breakthrough came with a rebellious group of artists and intellectuals known as the Provincetown Players. In the summer of 1916, on a ramshackle wharf in Provincetown, Massachusetts, they staged his one-act play Bound East for Cardiff. The play, set in the fog-drenched forecastle of a tramp steamer where a sailor lies dying, was unlike anything American audiences had ever seen. It was raw, atmospheric, and deeply human. It didn't just tell a story. It evoked a mood. With that single performance, the American theater grew up. From that point on, O'Neill's rise was meteoric. He became the voice of a new, serious American drama. His plays, infused with the naturalism of Ibsen, the psychological complexity of Strindberg, and the tragic scope of the ancient Greeks, stunned critics and audiences alike. He won his first Pulitzer Prize in 1920 for Beyond the Horizon. He would win 3 more in his lifetime, along with the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1936, the only American playwright ever to be so honored. His great works from this period, The Emperor Jones, Anna Christie, The Hairy Ape, Strange Interlude, Morning Becomes Electra, are a direct line to his own haunted past. He wrote about the sea, about dysfunctional families trapped by their history, about characters wrestling with faith, identity, and the search for belonging. He was exorcising his own demons on the public stage, transforming his private pain into universal art. But as his artistic life flourished, his personal life remained a landscape of wreckage, proving that one could diagnose a poison without being immune to it. He was continuing the O'Neill family tradition of emotional devastation. His first marriage, a brief youthful affair with Kathleen Jenkins, ended quickly, producing a son, Eugene O'Neill Jr., whom he would not see for the first 12 years of the boy's life. His second marriage to the writer Agnes Bolton gave him another son, Shane, and a daughter, Oona. But this marriage, too, disintegrated under the weight of his obsessive devotion to his work and his heavy drinking. The family curse, it seemed, was hereditary. The ghosts of his parents' misery were now stalking his own children. He repeated his father's pattern of emotional distance, often locking himself away for weeks on end to write, leaving his family feeling like secondary characters in his own drama. The tragedy he had so brilliantly captured on the page was now being reenacted in his own home. He would eventually find a measure of stability with his third wife, the actress Carlotta Monterey, who became his fierce protector and muse. But this stability came at the cost of near total isolation from the world, and most painfully from his own children. He was estranged from his sons. Eugene Jr., a brilliant classics scholar, would later die by suicide. Shane would descend into addiction and homelessness, a tragic echo of Eugene's own brother, Jamie. That left one child, one last hope for a connection that was not tainted by the family curse. His daughter, Oona. She was the light of his life, the one person who seemed to be able to penetrate his sorrowful armor. And it was this relationship, his last hope for paternal redemption, that was destined for the most dramatic and final rupture of all. By the early 1940s, Oona O'Neill was a bona fide it girl. She had grown into a stunningly beautiful and charming young woman. After being introduced to New York society, she was named the #1 debutante of the 1942 season. She was pursued by wealthy suitors, and her friendships with other famous young women like Gloria Vanderbilt made her a regular feature in gossip columns. She was everything her brooding, reclusive father was not: effervescent, social, and at home in the spotlight. Seeking a career as an actress, she moved to Hollywood, against her father's wishes. Eugene O'Neill had a deep, almost puritanical contempt for Hollywood, viewing it as a place of shallow commercialism, a world not unlike the cheap melodramas his own father had been trapped by. For Oona to be drawn to it felt like a small betrayal, but a far greater one was to come. In Hollywood, Oona was introduced by a talent agent to one of the most powerful and famous men in the world, Charlie Chaplin. Chaplin was a living legend, the genius behind The Tramp, a global icon whose fame was arguably greater than any film star today. He was also 53 years old. Oona was just 17. The age difference was staggering. To put it in stark perspective, Chaplin was born in the exact same year as Eugene O'Neill, 1888. Chaplin was immediately captivated by Oona's ethereal beauty and quiet intelligence. He initially considered her for a role in one of his upcoming films, but their professional relationship quickly blossomed into a deep and intense romance. For Oona, who had grown up with an emotionally distant and often absent father, Chaplin may have represented a figure of stability, wisdom, and adoration. For Chaplin, who had a long and very public history of relationships with extremely young women, Oona was a fresh and captivating muse. When word of the romance reached Eugene O'Neill at his home in California, he was consumed with a cold, silent rage. This was the ultimate nightmare. His daughter, his last best hope, was involved with a man his own age, an entertainer, a clown in his eyes, who was notorious for his attraction to teenage girls. It was a grotesque parody of a father-daughter relationship. He saw it as a profound betrayal, a rejection of everything he stood for. He issued an ultimatum. He forbade Oona from seeing Chaplin. But Oona, independent and deeply in love, made her choice. On her 18th birthday in June of 1943, she married Charlie Chaplin in a small secret ceremony. When Eugene O'Neill heard the news, he didn't just react with anger or disappointment. He performed an act of emotional surgery, a final brutal amputation. He completely and irrevocably disowned his daughter. From that day forward, he never spoke to Oona again. He never saw her again. He never met any of the 8 children she would have with Chaplin. He instructed his wife, Carlotta, to burn Oona's letters unopened. He meticulously cut her out of his will, adding the chillingly precise phrase, "I give and bequeath to my daughter Oona the sum of $1." It was a gesture of profound and chilling finality. The man who had spent his life writing about the inability of family members to escape each other had, with a single act of will, built an impenetrable wall between himself and his child. The loss was absolute. Why such an extreme, unforgiving reaction? It was more than just a father's disapproval. O'Neill's rage was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of his entire life. It was the protective fury of a father seeing his daughter with an older man with a sordid reputation. It was the snobbery of the high-minded, theatrical artist looking down on the popular entertainer, an echo of his resentment towards his own father's commercial success. And perhaps most profoundly, it was the unbearable pain of seeing his own history repeat itself. He too had married his first wife when she was very young, a disastrous union he had come to regret. Seeing Oona with Chaplin was like looking into a distorted mirror of his own past failures. The disownment of Oona was the final act in the decimation of the O'Neill family. With Eugene Jr. and Shane already lost to him in different ways, Oona's departure meant he was now, in essence, childless. The family line, as far as he was concerned, had ended. This profound sense of finality plunged him into his last and greatest creative period. It was after this final loss that he retreated completely and wrote the plays that would become his ultimate confessionals. He unsealed the vault of his family's history and wrote his masterpiece, Long Day's Journey into Night. The play, a near-perfect autobiographical account of one devastating day in the life of his family, was so painfully honest that he ordered it not be published or performed until 25 years after his death. It was his final reckoning with the ghosts of his father, his mother, and his brother. He also wrote The Iceman Cometh and A Moon for the Misbegotten, plays steeped in death, disillusionment, and the desperate need for forgiveness. Having lost his own children, he retreated into the family of his youth, dissecting their pain with the unsparing precision of a surgeon. His final years were a slow, painful fade. He was afflicted with a Parkinson's-like tremor that made it impossible for him to hold a pen. The man who had lived to write was silenced. He and Carlotta lived in near total seclusion in a Boston hotel. Poetically, he who was born in a hotel would die in one. He passed away in 1953. His reported last words were, I knew it, born in a hotel room and God damn it, died in a hotel room." Meanwhile, Oona's life unfolded in a way no one could have predicted. Her marriage to Charlie Chaplin was a long, devoted, and seemingly happy one, lasting 34 years until his death. She found the stability and paternal love with him that she never had from her own father. She became the matriarch of a large, creative family, breaking the cycle of tragedy that had defined the O'Neills for generations. It is one of the story's most complex ironies. The act that caused her father his greatest pain may have brought her the greatest peace. The story of Eugene O'Neill is the ultimate American tragedy, a profound exploration of the dark truth that genius and misery are often inseparable. He was a man who could see into the abyss of the human heart with unparalleled clarity, but could not find a way to heal his own. He revolutionized the stage, gave America a theatrical voice that was serious, profound, and fearless, and won every conceivable award for his efforts. But his public triumphs were mirrored by private losses that were almost Greek in their scope. He was haunted by the ghost of his mother, resented the legacy of his father, and mourned the brother he both loved and hated. And he lived to see all three of his own children lost to him through suicide, addiction, and in the case of Oona, through a final unforgivable act of emotional exile. He remains a towering figure, not just for the plays he wrote, but for the life he endured. He is a testament to the idea that great art is often born from great pain, that our deepest wounds can become the source of our most profound truths. He was the father of American drama, but he died a father with no children, a man who had explained the human condition to the world, but who died in almost complete isolation. He was the man who lost his daughter to a legend, but the greater tragedy is that he had been losing his entire family, including himself, his entire life. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way soon.